We are going to look at Psalm 137. Psalm 137. We've just finished up Isaiah, and so the spirit of the book is you're going to go and be, ultimately overtaken by Babylon, but the Lord will deal with Babylon. That was sort of the trade about that was happening prophetically in the book of Isaiah. And that sentiment, again, is more built out and even more specific during the days of Jeremiah, because he tells the people that it's going to be a span of 70 years, and they are going to go to Babylon, and they are going to be captives, and they are going to be, exiled. And that was a message that he was hated for. I mean, he was treated very badly because he was speaking that particular message of God. But that is exactly what happens. And so this psalm, I want to do the psalm today, and then I'm going to try to come back next week and do sort of the last book of the Psalms, sort of from a bird's eye view. And I'm trying to get us to understand the place of where this thing falls. I know there is a lot of mixed sentiment about when these Psalms are written and whatnot, but some things that we'll talk about next week will kind of help give us a little perspective, and that's what I want to try to do. But I want to understand the Psalm today that we're looking at here in 137. If you were held what you would call hostage, that's what it would be. I mean, it's not something that you want to put yourself in that position necessarily, even though it was their own decision. I'm not saying that it wasn't their decision or their sin, but it still feels the same way. If you were captured and away from your homeland, how would you feel? A, about your general attitude, and B, how would you feel about those who captured you? And C, how would you feel about your homeland? So how would you feel if you were captured and taken somewhere that wasn't home against your will? How would you feel personally?
Desolate.
Why?
Because you weren't familiar with where you were at, and everything was different, and you couldn't go and do what you wanted to do.
Couldn't go where you wanted to go, couldn't do what you wanted to do. So you feel disconnected. Your family has been taken away from you, or at least maybe some portion of that has happened. We read lots of places where in the language that was coming up, parents were told that their children were going to be taken away from them, and they would weary themselves longing for those kids to come back. And so those kids go off, and maybe they don't see their parents again.
You feel sunk.
I mean, that's a depressing atmosphere
It's past our thinking now.
It is past our thinking. Thank you. That's a good way to think about it. If you are taken away from a place that feels like home to you against your will, and even if you are treated in the very best way, it still feels like a prison sentence because you can't go where you want to go. You can't ultimately do what you want to do. How would you feel about your home? How would you feel? You would miss them. Would you think about your home? You would probably think about your home a lot. Because back in those days, you enjoyed this. Back when before this happened, this was the kind of life that we lived. Well, that is really the life that you are about to kind of hear a picture of. And it's directly at the end, although it's further down the line, it's still the end of what we have just concluded here with Isaiah. Because Isaiah says this is exactly what's going to happen. Now, let's go and listen to a psalm that sounds a lot like they are right in the very spot that we are describing. And let's just listen to what they are thinking about. And then we're going to also run over and review Obadiah in this as well.
I know how they felt. You know, I missed my family in Arizona, and Emma captured me and kept me here. And
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's a good woman. She's got you in a good tight hold, son. We're glad she's holding you here. Yes. To miss your family is, I mean, that's a real part. My sister lived in California. It wasn't a death sentence, but it hadn't always been roses that she's been out that far, and we've not been able to really be out there in the same way. Well, this is that to an aggravated degree because it's against your will and it's something that you did not intend necessarily yourself.
For all the disappointment and discouragement, there's anger too. You can't get
Ooh,
around
man.
that. It's one thing to be down and sad, but they're upset. And in Psalm 137, there's pieces of that you find in there, and there's a desire for some give back.
Oh yeah.
You know, you can't help it.
But we're going to see why that is. Okay. So let's.
Their inability to worship. They can't. It's a temple-centric worship, and they can't go to the temple.
Everything about and that was what God had threatened. Okay, you're going to go to a land, and there you are going to worship gods that you don't know. And what Mike just said is a part of what creates this disconnect and this inside of them.
And God has told them over and over and over, this happens. This is happening because you have left me.
That's what the whole thing is based on. And he said that's
synagogues.
Sir?
The synagogues worship there, which kind of opened the door for the church being accepted all over the place.
Isn't that interesting?
And all of that, just think of the guilt of knowing you've been told what's going to happen if you do this.
Yep.
Well, you know you did this.
Yep.
And it happens.
And right. Yep. That's not, and you have to know that God is a merciful God, but there is still all of this feeling that you deal with. And I think at least there is a very real spirit to what the people feel. So let's read this and there's some lessons here. Here's the setting, verse 1. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. That's what causes it. That's what brings about. We're in a foreign place. We're by these rivers, which I'm sure are perfectly fine rivers as far as productivity. They probably look similar in some ways, but they sit down and they are crying by the river. And they are crying because they remember Zion. They remember the place of God's dwelling. They remember the peace that they had before the destruction. They remember the prophets that spoke the word to them. All these images would be coming back. They would remember the worship that Mike is talking about. All these things, there was a requirement for them to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year and to be engaged in this kind of societal. Of course, all of that had been rejected. But when we remembered the place and we saw where we were, we cried. And I've done that. Spiritually, that's a horrible picture. To be crying at the place that you have caused, just like Randall's talking about. That is a bad thing. And it's certainly a spiritual application there for us to take away. If you are sitting, the walk with the Lord is not included a crying session by the river of Babylon. That's not a walk that God wants for you to experience. It's when we disobey that God has to do that. And he does. So there may be things in your life, or maybe things in my life that I am crying about, that I am maybe bringing by my own choices. So we have to be very careful about how we live our lives. There on the poplars, verse 2, we hung our harps. We talked about last week the emphasis and the requirement of all the things that David did to assimilate the worship of the Lord. And part of that was the musical instruments and the singers and all where the choirs would be, etc., and the various people that would be involved in that, rotations, and who was going to be involved when. And part of it involved their harps. Obviously, that's not the only instrument that is employed in temple worship, but it represents, we hung our harps because they're not being used for temple worship. We're not taking our harps. We're not taking our music. We're not taking our worship to the temple because the temple is gone at that particular point. They're our captors. Now look how aggravating this is. There our captors ask us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. What's happening there? What are they saying to the people?
Taunting.
It's a taunt. That's what that is. It is a sing us a song, I don't know. That stick is just an illusion, but that's the point. Okay, Samson, come out and entertain us. Ha ha. We'll make fun of you. And somehow they were derogatory toward them.
That'd be almost like the Philippian jailer saying to Paul Silas, sing praises.
Right. Oh, good comparison. Yeah, that's right. And those people, they might have wanted to hear their songs, out of sincerity or curiosity, but either way, coming out of the mouth of the one who is your captor, coming out of the one who is your tormentor, it does not come across the same way. It can't. Sing us a song. Well, yeah, it may as well be like pouring vinegar down their throat and saying, now sing. They cannot do it. They're in a strange place. They are under this captor who is over them. Those two words are similar. The Hebrew poetry expressing the spirit of those who had taken them, equal to someone who is tormenting, someone who is aggravating in some kind of way. And they want them to sing us one of the songs of Zion. Well, and here is how they respond to that. In verse 4, how can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? That's a probing question. Could they sing the songs of the Lord in a foreign land? It seems that they could. Would God be praised just the same by songs in a foreign land? I mean, if
It's done from the heart.
it's done from the heart, hey, not only that, but think back even more to the idea that Solomon said when God does come and discipline you, when he is setting up the temple, and Solomon is even praying, and he acknowledges that when God does discipline the people and he sends them to the land, from there, if they have a turn of heart and they do what? And they pray. Can you pray in a foreign land and God be praised? Yeah, you could. Now, obviously, they don't want to do that because they're very sad. They've been torn away from their country, but they could. Go ahead.
God hears the prayers of the sinners.
God hears us in our prayers to him. And if he has promised to be able to hear somebody's prayer that is contrite, just like you're saying, then surely someone that is desiring to praise the Lord. Now, there's a difference. See, the reason they don't want to sing the Psalms is because they're being probed to do it. Okay? They're kind of being made to do it.
Yeah, it's insulting to them.
Yes,
Mocking.
that's right.
This isn't about
That's
worship.
right. That's right.
And that's why they put the harps down. It's not because they don't want to worship. It's it's so dismissive. The Babylonians are being so dismissive about everything that they've been through, everything that they are. Hey, sing it, dance. It's a joke to them, and that's why I guess you keep on going at 137. There's a desire for them to see God smash Babylon, because it wasn't just that you took us by force, you drug us out here, and then you made fun of us. You didn't just beat us down, you humiliated us.
Yes.
And there's something different about you physically can hurt me, but when you attack me mentally and emotionally, there's something far deeper that's taking place.
And that really is suggestive of where they have moved to. It's not just a selfish thing, but they have moved to where they are thinking about the Lord. And that is a good thing. They are finally sensitive, because up to this point, in all honesty, they had not been. That's why God is so disciplinary of them, because they didn't show this kind of sentiment. That's why I'm trying to take us here. This is it's like somebody is dialed in here, but they didn't have that until the discipline was brought about. So how can they sing this song in the land that's foreign land. So verse 5, if I forget you, Jerusalem. See, that's the place. Zion, verse 1, connected to Jerusalem in verse 5. If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. Well, that's pretty graphic. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I don't remember you, or if I don't consider Jerusalem, look, my highest joy. Do you see the difference? You see how, I think that's positive. That's the spirit that God would want from us. And it takes the discipline that God does in order to bring this out. But we also read in Isaiah that God would spare a little bit. What do you call that? A remnant. Okay. This is the remnant. This is the part that God has spared. And he also said of that remnant that he would give them a new heart. That was the spirit of all those green places in Isaiah, where God is saying, I'm going to do this for you. I'm coming. I'm going to get you. I'm going to bring you back. And I'm going to give you a desire to serve me and a spirit to honor me. And this is the consequence of God doing that. Boy, what a blessing to be able to see this kind of transition. But it sounds like, and maybe I'm wrong, but it sounds like this is completely from a view of when, not where the order of the psalm itself is arranged, but the writing itself sounds just like when they are there.
It is astonishing when we consider all of the different periods the Jewish people were punished by other nations. And, you know, there's prophecy that foretells it, and God decreed it, and it is right that it happened. But it is interesting that Hitler wanted to persecute Jews, and the Jewish nation was virtually lost in numbers by Hitler's people and his, carnal vision of life, who should be reigning. And they had suffered immensely many times in their life as a nation. That is a horrible, horrible pain.
It is terrible that they have dealt with those kinds of discipline issues from God in times like this where we're looking at. But the glory of it is that out of that discipline, that's what we can embrace here. And that's where the turn of the Lord is working, because they start thinking about, through these times that Dad is referencing, Assyria and Babylon and other nations, even the Edomites here that we're going to read about. Those are moments where God is using other nations to bring this spirit. If I forget Jerusalem, may my hand forget its skill. If I forget, Jerusalem is to be my highest joy. Don't let me be able to even sing a song. And that's where God is bringing them back to. And that is what I'm trying to help us to be able to see, is that the discipline that God uses produces this. This is an incredible attitude. It's the right spirit, even down to the very end, which we're going to look at. Let's do verse 7, where there is this hey, look upon them. Okay, so remember, Lord, what the Edomites did. On the day Jerusalem fell. Well, what did they do? If you draw in your Bible, that top part of verse 7 needs to be aimed down toward the lower part of verse 7. Because here's what they said. They said, tear it down. Who did? Edom did. They said, tear it down to its foundations. When? On the day that Jerusalem fell. So when God brought the punishment that he was talking about that he's going to bring, and Edom noticed it, they reveled in that. They rejoiced. Now you can mark there, we don't have time to read it, but you can mark there the book of Obadiah, because the book of Obadiah is a prophecy against Edom. God speaks by a prophet to this very issue. And he says, this is what I am going to do. I am going to destroy Edom. God promises through Obadiah that he is going to destroy Edom. So the people are saying, God, do what you promised and bring about what you said you were going to do. Now that is assurance. They are showing faith. Where is that spirit before the days of Isaiah? Where? Where is that sentiment? Who is the person that raised their hand and said, God, come and do what you promised? You will vindicate. You will be honored in what you say. You will do what you promised. There wasn't a person that Isaiah was preaching to that had that spirit.
When Israel was coming north, they wanted to go into the promised land, but before they did, there was a nation that attacked them from behind and killed their elderly and cripples, and really took vengeance on that group of Israelites. And God always remembered what those people did when they were trying to drag Israel down.
Yep,
they were taking
he did.
unfair advantage of them. And
He did.
so this is what the Edomites as a nation are
That's right.
doing when they say raise it,
Right.
raise it.
They're acting just like the Amalekites did. That's right. That's a good comparison. They were celebratory and saw that there was some kind of advantage in it for themselves. And God, through the prophet Obadiah, speaks to that very nation and gives them the exact terminology here. You said, tear it down. And no, the Lord is against that. Secondly, daughter Babylon, verse 8, doomed to destruction. I used to cringe here, honestly. That's where I used to be on 137. Not that in the back of my mind, I knew that God was right, but because now I know all the things that I know from studying the Old Testament, especially from the mouths of the prophets, and how God said that he would deal with Babylon. This is right. This is right. Daughter of Babylon, doomed to destruction. They're doomed to destruction because God said so. God said they have gone too far. They treated my people with disgust. They treated my people with no respect. They walked over them. They did things they didn't respect the young or the old. I mean, they didn't have respect for them. Numerous descriptive phrases in Isaiah alone that show how wickedly they dealt with the people of Israel. So the people of Israel now listen to God, and they're saying, okay, wait, the God that is disciplining us will also bring about the discipline of Babylon. And this is how that's going to be. Happy is the one who repays you according to what you have done to us. Happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them to the rocks. Now you can mark there Isaiah 13 and verse 6, which is what we have already studied, but we will review it just momentarily. Isaiah 13 is all about a prophecy about Babylon. That's where the context begins in verse 1. And it continues all the way to the end of the chapter and maybe even beyond the chapter. But this is verse 16. Their infants, this is the wrath of God being poured out. Their infants will be dashed to pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be looted and their wives violated. That's what God said would happen. Now, the Israelites here in 137 are saying, happy is the day when that happens. It's not it is God's vengeance. It's not just a throttle for human vengeance. It's the human submitting or acknowledging that God is going to bring vengeance. Comments, questions, observations?
Think of the level of anger that they had to be at to want for children to be thrown against rocks. Like that's, Shirley said, I think earlier, that this is beyond the level that we can even understand or grasp, because I've been angry at people before. I've been upset at people before, but I would never utter the words that I hope that your children are throwing against the rock. Like that's, to be at that level. But there again, on the flip side of that coin, we can't drift into the place of saying, well, God's cruel for doing so.
That's right. That's right.
Because of God's sovereignty and his power, he has the right to call anything holy or unholy, and has the right to punish or reward at his decision. So,
and the very people that here are pictured to want to participate in the dashing, Babylon dashed their infants. Don't forget that.
well,
That is partly why the writer is saying, pay them back as they have done. That's why God is so mad at them. He sent Babylon. He called for Babylon. He gave Nebuchadnezzar. The entire world was at that man's finger, even the wild animals. That is the most bizarre situation. Anyhow, I can't get off on that. But he has given him all this power, but he took it too far. And he dashed Israel's infants, and he dashed their old people, and he put them down and made a trek over them. Disgusting things that he did out of disrespect because he went too far.
That's what I was going to say. It's very interesting to see how God will use nations like Babylon. And then when they go too far, then he will punish them and do to them what they did by going too far.
Now, that is just like, okay, somebody who really is offensive to you, somebody that sins against you. Well, they're wrong about that. But guess what? Now, you can be wrong about something. Now the responsibility is clicked onto you. Because if you don't respond right to the one who sinned against you, if you take your vengeance too far, now look at what happens. See what a shoe that is? Now, we have that in relations all the time. There shouldn't be any hesitancy in our minds thinking that nationally that kind of thing would also be a boot that fits. But that fits right at home. Because there's a person that does this to you. And then when you want to
Double back.
extra, well, you go too far. And now all of a sudden, you're the one under the spotlight. And it wasn't even you that sinned originally. Is Babylon, think about it, is Babylon guilty of Israel's behavior? They're not guilty for Israel's behavior. They are not. They didn't do that. They didn't sin against God. But God used Babylon to come in, to be a tool of discipline. And then God has the audacity to use a tool of discipline and then say, wait a minute, even my tool of discipline is subject to my expectations. Whew.
So
Hello.
1 Samuel 8, when Samuel puts his two kids
Yeah,
in,
and they're
and they're not
taking
doing the
a-
job, they're not,
yeah,
whatever,
they're
and
taking a
they
bath.
demand a king.
mm,
Samuel's response is to be displeased with the Israelites. He's angry at them for wanting him
Yes.
and his son replaced with a king.
he does.
So when he prays to God, there's a sense in which he prays to God, God, I want you to get them because they're wanting to replace me. And God says, you need to stop because it's not about you. They didn't reject you, they rejected me. So in every sense, we struggle a lot of times because we think the sin is against us, therefore it's our job to take vengeance.
Come on.
And instead, God says, stop. It's
Yes.
not about even the sin they did to you. It's
Right.
the fact that they don't acknowledge me. Therefore, really what you have planned for them, I don't even care about.
Yes.
So then God uses Samuel to put Saul in place, but he
Right.
tells him before he does, God's fixing to use this king spot. And he's going to take your people, he's going to take your boys, he's going to take your girls, he's going to take your stuff, he's going to take your horses, and he's going to do all this stuff. And then you're going to get upset about that.
Mm,
And it's almost as though God says through Samuel, you have no right to be upset.
don't blame me.
You did
This
this.
is
You
what
put
you
this
asked
in
for.
your life.
Yeah.
So to your point, one of the things we have to fight against is believing that we have a right to exact justice.
Vengeance
says-
is mine, says the Lord.
So Isaiah 59, when God decides, hey, there's nothing else down there, I'm fixing to put on these clothes and go down there.
Yeah.
He puts on one thing that we're not allowed to put on in Ephesians 6.
That's right.
That's the clothes of vengeance.
Come on. Huh?
Because it's not our position to do so.
No.
But it's hard for us not, I say that acknowledging fully that it's very difficult for a human not to
Yes.
want to exact revenge when
Yes.
somebody does wrong.
Yes. We are, see, look, just like we've been studying about in Deuteronomy. When you had somebody to, do some crime under the law and you exact the exact letter of the law, you are not taking vengeance. You are exacting the degree to which God has said, this is what will happen when somebody acts this way. Isaiah was not taking personal vengeance by being the distributor of this word when he said, Jerusalem, you're going to be sacked. And after that, the one who sacks you is also going to be sacked. Jeremiah is not taking personal vengeance when he says Jerusalem's going to be sacked. And after that, God is going to sack Babylon. So when you say something, just like here, Obadiah said to the Edomites, God is going to sack you. That's what's going to happen. He's going to destroy you. And Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel all say, God, Babylon is mine. I'm going to deal with you. You went too far. You're going to pay for that. And there's 3 books that identify the process of the big ones. All 3 deal with aiming at that. I'm not saying it's not in the other ones. I'm just saying those 3 for sure have that protocol. And it shows that God is to say what God says is not taking personal vengeance. And that's what this is. Let Edom be destroyed. Tear it down, they said. Well, let Edom be destroyed. Well, why are they saying that? Because God said it. Let Babylon be seized and their children be dashed. Why did they say that? Because God said it. So there is a confidence in you being able to say what God says. And when you say what God says like that, then it's not really you that's pulling the trigger, if you will. It's you're leaning on God. Other comments, questions, good stuff.
I think about, we don't think that anything like that happens today,
All right.
but to a certain degree it does. Back in the earlier part of the last century, they had a thing called draft. Whether you liked it or not,
That's right.
you was going to be drafted, that if you were healthy.
Yes.
And in the, of course, 4 years I was in, Dude was in. I don't know about Earl over there, but we were all in part of that. 4 years I was in the, I was on the sea,
Yes, sir.
and you don't worship God out on the sea. There was 2 members on the ship with us, and one assembly of God. And we would get together whenever we could.
Yep.
But that was the only thing we could do.
Well,
But we was taken from our family, we was taken away from the church. It wasn't our
that's right.
decision, it
That's
was
right.
the decision of the government.
That's right. That's right. And the Lord knows those kinds of circumstances. And there's lots of those around the world where people are not able to do what they want to do. And our God is merciful. He understands those kind of circumstances. Blessed are those who have the opportunity. Blessed are those who honor the Lord and obey the Lord and seek the Lord. Good class. Thanks, everybody. See y'all next week.